Welcome to the Get Real Therapy podcast, where we educate and empower you with real therapeutic tools to help you improve your life. If you're listening to this podcast, consider this a sign that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. It's time to get real. Well, welcome back, everybody, to episode 2 of the Get Real Therapy podcast. I'm Abby.
And I'm V.
And we're super excited you're here. To start off today, we wanted to go ahead and address some of the questions and feedback we were getting from the Instagram community. What was some of the questions that you wanted to talk about?
We had a lot of questions and comments about what is the self. And we saw that a lot of people had their own ways of defining what that is, which is fantastic, because that is one of the first things whenever I try to explain this to somebody. I always try to go ahead and see if they've ever had an experience in understanding what the self is. So a couple of people told me that they feel that they're in self when they are with family. Some people tell me that they learn that they're in self when they go on vacation. Somebody told me that they feel that they're in self when they go to concerts. And all of those are 100% valid. So the real question isn't, do you know when you're in self? It's more of, do you know when you're not in self? I know that I'm in self when I'm in this situation. And usually people are able to go ahead and realize that they're in self because that's pretty much the best way they could go ahead and feel. And I've also talked to some people that when I asked them, would you like to go ahead and learn how to feel this way? I still don't understand why, but they seem reluctant to go ahead and say, I want to feel fantastic all the time. Obviously, I understand that's a part of them that's very protective, because that part has a very protective role because it's been running the show this entire time. Mm-hmm. But it's important to understand that there's a higher self, and that higher self is exactly when you feel at your absolute best. I've also had it with some people that don't even have any concept of what the self actually is. Some people actually told me that they've never had an experience where they've felt all those qualities of confidence, courageous,
calm, clarity,
Exactly.
Connectedness, creativity, curiosity, compassion.
Yeah. So they've never had moments in their lives where they felt all of those at one time. And for those people, I usually go one by one out of all those characteristics of the self. And when we talk about at one point in their life, they felt one of those things. Maybe it's not at all times, but it's a possibility to go ahead and say, I know I felt courageous during this one moment of my life. I know I felt calm during this one moment. And it's specifically calm in a situation where you see other people getting flustered and you were able to maintain that calmness, or you felt this courageousness when someone else could have not necessarily felt it. And everyone could go ahead and say, yes, I've felt those individual qualities, maybe not at one time, but the fact that you felt them separately doesn't necessarily mean that's not who you are. And that's exactly what we want to go ahead and show in this journey that all the audience members are going to go ahead and take with us, that you are able to go ahead and learn, and we could go ahead and help, hopefully, to teach you how to acquire that feeling more and more and more, and make it your normal way of being. And for the people that are listening there, oh, that's just the way I am. Well, that's fantastic. That's really good. But there's moments in your lives, and this is for everybody, where that's not necessarily the case. For me, it was speaking. For me, it could have been at work. I remember not feeling myself. Mm-hmm. I graduated at 24, became a dentist, and opened up my practice. And I just happened to be very good at it. It was something that I innately felt that I was in self. But it was only when I was doing the dentistry. When I was actually trying to go ahead and manage people, I wasn't necessarily the best at that. I want that same feeling I had in getting into a state of flow, which we'll talk about that later in the episode, or that same sensation of being in self as a dentist. I want that same sensation to be as an administrator, because that is part of the job, as a marketer, because that is part of the job, or as speaking to my employees, because again, that's part of the job, and with every other aspect of my life. I want to make sure that that same sensation of I'm invincible almost, or I'm limitless in my potential, can be shown in other areas of my life. I want to give the viewers and the listeners the ability to be able to do that, the tools to be able to do that, because guess what? I got these tools, and I got them. I don't want to go ahead and say late. I got them at the right time, honestly, right? Because when you get them, you get them. Mm-hmm. But I wish that I had the opportunity to learn these tools at a much earlier time in my life. It would have been a completely different situation. And at the same time, I don't regret it, because even my mistakes gave me a lot of beautiful things. Mm-hmm. I just hope that everybody listening could go ahead and take full advantage of this gift that is the potential to be a beautiful life.
I think it's important to kind of go back to what you were saying originally about when people are describing when they feel in self, when they're describing when they feel that they're confident or that they're creative or that they're calm. I want people to know that it's possible to feel some self energy in your life, but you could still be blended with other parts of yourself. And so what I mean by that is, again, these parts exist in different neural networks in your brain. And so it's possible that you can go ahead and have a part that's somewhat activated, even if it's subconsciously, and still have some self energy there. It's just being able to become self aware enough to notice, oh, I'm starting to feel a little fuzzy in my head because I heard this song on the radio and that song reminded me of a time in my life when I really at a low point or I just broken up with somebody. And the reason I use that as an example is because everybody has a song or they have a smell or they have a place that immediately triggers a memory of some time in their past. That is an example of a part, a neural network in your brain being activated from something in the environment,
And they
stimulating
call that nostalgia.
Exactly. So that's a part, a time in your life. You were in this part, you were in this phase of your life, and that part gets activated from something in the environment triggering it. And so a song, for example.
Yeah. And not only that, but then they've taught that exact same thing to use it for your advantage. I know exactly what you're talking about. The second I think of the song 1979 by the Smashing Pumpkins, I get taken back to when I used to live in Chicago, when I was in middle school. It is such a powerful song for me to remind me of my middle school and early high school years. I remember exactly how I felt like. So that's, like you said, a neural network. Now, that being said, it doesn't always have to be tied in to an emotion. It could be tied to a lot of different things. School or programs have taught us that when you go ahead and you listen to a song while you're studying, if you're learning about, let's say, a topic, let's say anatomy, for example, and now I'm at the anatomy exam and I get to this question and, oh crap, I don't remember. Well, if I think of the song, that could actually help me remember exactly what we were talking about. As I found out about this, and I think I was learning about this in 7th or 8th grade, I don't remember for what exam, but as soon as I learned about it, what I did is I put it to the test. And this is proof right here, because if anybody wants to go ahead and pick up a 7th grade or 8th grade biology textbook, I promise you it's there, assuming you could find that edition, right? But I wanted to go ahead and see how true this concept was. So what I did is I looked at this little blurb on the side of this biology textbook, and it said that formic acid is produced by red ants. And formic acid is the Latin word for formica. Formica, to me, sounds like hormiga, and hormiga is Spanish for ants. So I was able to go ahead and use this essentially relationship neural network that, because I understood the word hormiga, I remembered that it related to formica, and then that related to formic acid. And ever since then, I knew that ants created formic acid, and when they bite you, that's what you feel, the sting. So that's the exact same thing. It's not necessarily a song, but it is a neural network, as in, because that neural network already existed, the neural network of language, I'm able to go ahead and take advantage of relating something that's a new memory, which is I want to try to remember formic acid, but because I have no basis, I have nothing to go ahead and attach it to. Now I'm able to go ahead and use this pre-existing neural network, which is language, which is pretty strong. And now I'm able to attach something that seems irrelevant, and now it has a lot of relevance in my life. And it reminds me also about this story about this journalist. And he goes to this competition where they try to memorize things. And before he goes there, he's thinking to himself, oh man, I'm about to go ahead and go and talk to these people that go to these competitions to memorize random numbers, to memorize names, to memorize these number x to the number of digits of pi, right? And he's thinking to himself, these guys, they must be geniuses, right? And when he gets there and he starts talking to them to interview them, he realizes they're not geniuses, they're regular people. So what he did is he starts asking them, how in the world are you able to remember all this useless information? And it's not useless in the sense that there's random numbers. Like, you must have a powerful mind. And just like working out, in terms of working out your body, you could work out your mind. And that's exactly what they did. What they ended up doing is they use that exact same analogy that I was talking about, that you're able to relate something irrelevant like formic acid. I never knew what formic acid was before then. So there's many ways to do it, but one example, and this pertains to, I think, numbers, is in order to go ahead and memorize these random numbers, they're able to go ahead and assign each individual digit from 0 to 9, and they assign it to an object. So for example, 0 is a block of ice because sub-zero temperatures. So it pertains to each individual. So for me, 0 would be ice because it's sub-zero. 1 would be sun because it rhymes. 2 would probably be I'm making this up on the spot. So let's go ahead and say twins. And so forth and so forth. The point is that what they do to memorize these random numbers is they imagine, or this person imagined, walking into a house and then seeing those objects which now have meaning to them. So instead of having to
personal
memorize,
meaning
yeah,
too.
personal meaning, exactly. Because again, these neuronal networks already exist in the mind, and you're just attaching something that has no significance, like numbers, to it. And because they were able to go ahead and do it, now they're able to go ahead and instead of memorizing these random numbers, they're just memorizing what they saw from entering the front of the house to entering the back of the house. So they just imagine going from the front of the house saying, I see this ice cream cone, which is the number 5. I see this picture of a pelican, which is the number 7, this ice cube, which is the number 0. And now they're able to go ahead and memorize a number that seems random. And all they're memorizing instead is just the order of things. And this allows you to retain a lot more information than if you were to go ahead and try to memorize random numbers that have no meaning to you. So the important thing again is taking advantage of these neuronal networks. That's one way you could go ahead and do that.
I mean, if you think about the song, the ABCs, right?
Yeah.
The ABCs was attached to a song.
Absolutely.
So that's just something that I feel all of us grew up with and we didn't realize, oh, we're using music, we're using something else to go ahead and learn something new. I was also thinking about how the same thing in terms of learning, attaching meaning to it is one of the reasons that people get addicted to cigarettes, get addicted to a lot of different drugs, because it also holds a personal meaning and a value to them besides the actual chemical dependency that the body starts to form with some of those drugs, right? So the same thing also can be said with the fact that when we experience negative life events, our brain forms a meaning with those negative life events. The brain is an association machine. So whatever the brain associates with one thing to another thing, even if they're not related, it's going to have some type of effect if the brain perceives it as something that is positive or if the brain perceives it as something that is negative.
So in terms of addiction, in terms of smoking, it's interesting to go ahead and see that it's multiple parts that make you go ahead and smoke. And I've spoken to a lot of people and also a lot of patients that say they have an interest in wanting to quit smoking. And every single time I ask them to find out what are their parts that are associated with smoking, it's always interesting that it's the same players. So it's very interesting. You're going to go ahead and see the same patterns. And by patterns, I mean the same parts that are associated with dealing with smoking, with dealing with addiction, with dealing with all these, with pretty much everything. But with smoking, just to go ahead and stay on one so people could go ahead and have a little bit of a clue of what I'm talking about, is people who smoke usually have a couple of parts that are all related. The first one is, why did you start to smoke? Obviously, a lot of people, you try a cigarette, you're not going to go ahead and get addicted. If it was, I would have been addicted. A lot of people try it and obviously they smell it and taste it and they're like, that's not for me. So why would someone try it in the first place though? That's one of the biggest reasons that people tend to miss, because if you ask somebody, oh, well, why do you smoke? And it's like, oh, it's a bad habit, but why?
Stress reliever, appetite suppressant, whatever the reason is.
Exactly. But the biggest reason why they did it usually stems from a lack of connection, specifically lack of connection.
A need to belong.
Exactly. A need to belong. That's exactly it. And because they didn't necessarily feel that they had that. Well, guess what? They see smokers. They see that that's a tight-knit group.
It's a community.
Absolutely. It's a community. You could become friends with a smoker if you're a fellow smoker. They give things to each other for free. I've seen that many times. They're, can I get a cigarette? I mean, and cigarettes are expensive. You know, they've always been expensive. So I can't imagine going to somebody who's like, can I get a beer? Or can I get whatever? And they're just going to give it to you. But with smokers, they create this community because they enjoy it. They want people to go ahead and
They want to
belong.
share the
Yeah, they
experience.
want
They
to share
want to
their experience.
connect, which
Exactly.
again is an aspect of self. So you can see though that this is a perfect intro to the difference between self and a self-like part. The part of them that enjoys smoking and wants to belong and have a sense of community and connect with others is using smoking as the bridge to get to that place. But the issue is that we all know, and all smokers know this, that it's not healthy for their overall system. And so what would be the difference then? That part seeking out a self-like quality, right? And the key word here is self-like. It's seeking out connection, which is a quality, a characteristic of self, but it's doing so from a place of disconnection with themselves, disconnection with what are their overall goals for their life, what are the hopes and dreams that they have. Because if you smoke, you have a much higher risk of developing a lot of different health conditions, which are going to end your life prematurely compared to somebody who doesn't. Now, it doesn't happen all the time, but there just is a greater risk for that. So I think it's important to see that that part got the person to start smoking and kept them smoking really did have a positive intention of connection, just like all our parts do, even all the parts that are engaged in behaviors that we perceive, well, another part of us perceives as bad and does have real consequences in our life. So I think it's important to note there is a difference between being in self and then having qualities of self that are actually stemming from parts. So you can see that all these parts have different intentions. The part that goes ahead and smokes has the desire to connect, but you can see that the quality of self that it possesses, which is connection, is a self-like part. It's a self-like characteristic of the self connection, and ultimately it's damaging the overall system.
Yeah, so basically, to clarify and to make sure that I'm understanding it too, you're basically stating that when you're trying to be in self, but it's causing you to get the wrong results, as in you're injuring yourself, that's a self-like part.
Yeah. So, for example, somebody who has a people pleasing part, right? So, a people pleasing part is born out of experiences in life where you sought connection with either a mom, a dad, a family member, a friend, whoever it may be. You're seeking out that connection and you're seeing that you're getting results. You're getting that contact, you're getting that care, you're getting that love because you're people pleasing them, right? Because of the fact that you're abandoning some part of yourself in order to maintain that relationship, in order to maintain that connection. And so while it could look like you have a lot of compassion and it could look like you're very easygoing because you're a people pleaser, because you put other people before yourself, you could seem very selfless. That compassion quality of that part, even though a self characteristic is compassion, that self-like part is only showing compassion out of an origin of fear.
Absolutely. Yes. Like I was saying, it's not getting necessarily the result you want because it's injuring yourself.
Yeah, you're betraying a part of yourself to maintain the connection, maintain the relationship, maintain whatever the case may be.
We talked about self-like parts and we talked about what the true self is. A great tool to go ahead and use is to try to memorize the characteristics of the self. What are those characteristics?
Yeah, so the 8 C's of self, you have calm, you have compassion, you have clarity, you have courage, you have connectedness, you have confidence, and you have creativity and curiosity. The other thing to note is that these characteristics of self, when you're really tapping into your self energy, are spontaneous. You don't have to try to cultivate them. So something that I did with my therapist for a long time that I've worked with now for 6 years, I would go ahead and I would find the target part of myself that was, let's just say I was feeling a lot of anxiety. I show up to the session, yeah, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety in my life. I know that anxiety is some type of manager, a protective part of myself. And so I focus on that feeling in my body. So I notice the anxiety is in my chest. Okay. And then it's okay. Let me go ahead and connect to this feeling because I want to go ahead and have permission from this protective part of myself to step aside to go ahead and communicate with the exiled part of me, my original traumatic wounds, the part of myself that, again, the memory, the situation that I've exiled away. I don't ever want to remember this moment in my life. But in order to go ahead and not have this anxiety and to heal, I need to connect with that exiled part of myself. To get into self, this is where a part of me was trying to get into self. I would go ahead and do some deep breathing in the session. Now, deep breathing in life is great. You need to do that. It does help calm your nervous system. But just to show you that When you're in self, you're already calm. Your breathing is already slow, deep breathing. When you're in a part, you have to engage in the deep breathing to get yourself into that calm
Yeah,
state.
and that's a
And
little
that's
trick
the
right there.
difference.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people go ahead and tell me, "Oh yeah, I've been to therapy for many years," and I'd ask them, "Well, how's that process going?" It's like I haven't really resolved anything.
Yes, because you really need to make it an experience. And that's where it's really important to be doing the right types of therapy that are going to get you real results. And when I say real results, I mean to have neuroplastic changes occur inside of your brain. So if you don't have that neuroplastic change, guess what? You're still going to get triggered about the same thing. You're still going to have the anxiety. You're still going to have all these parts that are stuck in the past because of the fact that you're only talking about them from a cognitive perspective and you're not really addressing the root cause, and having that experience of IFS is going to really allow you to have that neuroplastic change.
Yeah, one important way to be able to do that is to make sure that it's your true self that is making those changes. The important reasons for that is because the parts themselves can go ahead and be wary of another part, let's say a self-like part, trying to go ahead and resolve these issues. Because if you think about it, every single part is just a younger version of yourself. So why would a child trust another child to resolve an adult problem?
Why would a part be willing to trust anybody else when that part's immediate caregivers in the environment let it down in the first place?
Okay.
Because that's
Yeah.
usually what happens, is that we're in some type of situation when we're a child where somebody failed to protect us from something, or they
Absolutely.
failed to teach us something that would have been valuable to our overall life.
And that's one of the reasons I love about internal family systems, because internal family system essentially makes it so that you are aware that these parts have their own thoughts, their own feelings, and you could treat them as individuals. And when you're able to do that, you could actually ask them to tone down their behavior. One of the reasons I love about internal family systems, they focus more on how you're supposed to go ahead and feel, specifically how you feel when you're in your true self. The reason that's important is because when you get into a part, guess what? That feeling is going to go ahead and always be tied to the original traumatic event. Why? Because that's how neuronal networks work. In the same way, when I was talking about that example about the formic acid, guess what? That is tied to that memory of when I learned it. I'm not thinking about anything else.
Exactly. Same thing with the song or a
Yes,
smell.
exactly. That's why nostalgia brings you back to a specific event when you obviously learned it. A lot of people, they listen to a song and they're like, oh yeah, I was like feeling this. I was with this person. I was at this, and they
This
remember
age.
everything. Exactly. And that's exactly the
What a
same
part
thing.
is.
So internal family system takes advantage of this phenomenon that everyone's aware of. And that's exactly why it's able to work. And it's not to go ahead and say that other therapies don't work. Other therapies are able to go ahead and function. And the way I like to think about it is that therapies that exist currently, and you'll go ahead and talk about that more, they have their place, and it's usually after internal family systems. Internal family systems, I think it's one of these therapies that should be done first and foremost. And essentially, you use the other therapeutic techniques once you go ahead and you fix all the malfunctioning parts.
Yeah. For example, CBT, that's been the gold standard in the therapy world for over 50 years at this point. So, cognitive behavioral therapy. So, the idea is that if you go ahead and change your thoughts, you're going to change your life. Now, that sounds great, but if we could all do that, there would be no reason to go to therapy, right? And so I think most people will say, oh, yeah, I tell myself positive affirmations and I still feel crappy. I still feel anxious. I still feel depressed. It's not enough to just be, oh, I'm going to go ahead and start thinking differently and then everything in my life is going to get better. The reason why you have those thoughts and beliefs in the first place is due to some type of experience or experiences in your past that strengthen these neural networks, strengthen these parts that now they're part of your life for a reason. Your experiences have shaped your beliefs, and then your beliefs are going to shape your future experiences. So unless you get to the root of where those beliefs stems from, you can try changing your thinking all day long, but until you really go ahead and reprocess that original memory, those original moments in your life that strengthen these thoughts and beliefs in the first place, nothing is actually going to change.
Exactly. The reason it can't work is in the name itself, cognitive behavioral therapy. I am aware that this is even happening. If you're aware that this is happening, guess what? That means that you're self-aware. And that's the problem we have in not just society, but in everybody's life altogether. It's this inability to be aware. People think they're aware, but they're not. I just only recently became aware. And
and truly aware.
Yeah, truly aware. But it wasn't until I did internal family systems that it just blew my mind of, holy crap, it really does feel like I'm actually present now. And that being said, though, one of the tools that did help me become very aware was this book that we both read, which is called A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. That book was beautiful. That started our journey to becoming more self-aware. Ever since I read that book, I always remember saying that it helped with 60% of the problems. And I think it's a different way of saying it. I think it helped me become aware of 60, or maybe honestly like 40%. It helped me become that more aware. And honestly, if I could get aware by a percentage point,
yes,
I'll do it.
I'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. So the fact that it helped by 40%, that shows you how powerful that book is. But internal family system is that other 60%.
Yes. And it's more step by step how to actually get those results. It's like A New Earth, amazing. I can literally remember exactly where I was when I first started reading that book. I literally felt like my head spun around 3 times and I got dropped onto earth in that moment. So it's ridiculously powerful. I would absolutely recommend it to anybody. But that being said, it was, now I'm aware, but how do I actually do anything about it? What are the actual steps and tools? Because again, especially when you've had a lot of trauma in your life, it is so difficult to do therapy in the first place. It's just the bottom line. Like, you have all these protective parts of yourself, you have all this anxiety, all these parts, and it makes it really difficult and really confusing in the first place. So that's why things like IFS as a therapeutic model is so powerful. So IFS really could be seen as practicing the ultimate definition of self-awareness, where you're learning to go ahead and notice, like, oh, I'm feeling some anxiety all of a sudden. Oh, I don't feel as clear-headed as I did 20 minutes ago. It's starting to really track and become aware of the different sensations and feelings in your body, as well as your thought processes. And so that really is the definition of self-awareness, is being aware of how you're feeling and how those feelings are then going to go ahead and influence your decisions and ultimately your behaviors. And then, of course, whatever you do or your behaviors are going to go ahead and influence the rest of the consequences that are going to follow down the line.
What would you go ahead and say neuroplasticity is for people who don't know what that word means?
So neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change. It's the ability for neural networks to go ahead and change. So originally, when people were studying the brain, they really thought that the brain was fixed, that you can't go ahead and fix things like depression. It's just your brain is depressed. So neuroplasticity really has shown us that no, like, your brain can change, your brain can heal. The best way to view it is your brain can change for the positive or your brain can change for the negative. So when you have negative experiences, your brain is going to adapt to those negative experiences in an effort to help keep you safe. In the same way that when you have positive experiences, your brain is going to develop a positive belief about whatever those experiences showed it. Neuroplasticity would be the brain's ability to grow, the brain's ability to reorganize itself, reorganize these neural networks. And so a key component of therapies like internal family systems is memory reconsolidation. So we talked about this in the first episode, that one of the reasons that IFS works so well is because when the emotional part of your brain sees an image, the emotional part of your brain cannot tell if that image is real or fake. So memory reconsolidation really uses that part of your brain to go ahead and reprocess these traumatic memories. And so essentially, you're going to go ahead and reprocess whatever that memory was. And so you're using your biology for you in this moment by creating this visualization of going back in time to whatever that moment was that really had an impact on you. And you're going to go ahead and visualize a different outcome. When you're going to use this in terms of IFS, you're going to only go back to that place in time in your mind when you're in a state of self. Because if you're not in a state of self, then these parts are going to go ahead and hijack you, because again, they don't think that you should go back to those places, right? They don't want you to go ahead and remember those traumatic memories and events and experiences. And so that's why these parts start to form in the first place as protective mechanisms to not go ahead and remember the pain, to not deal with it.
Yeah, and you think about how much sense that makes. You burn yourself on something, you hurt yourself on something, you don't want to do that again. Or a really good example is like you get bit by a snake. If you get bit by a snake, or you have some traumatic event where a snake scares you, you recognize it as a dangerous situation, you don't want to go ahead and get next to a snake ever again. But what's going to happen? Now your brain is in the lookout for anything that even resembles a snake.
Yep.
So now even a stick, you go outside, or if I go outside and I look at a stick, it's not going to bother me. But somebody who has these fears associated with the snake is going to go ahead and be more aware of that stick, which again is an inanimate object. It doesn't do anything. But you can go ahead and see how that part is now working a little bit harder than it should be. And it's taking you away from the moment, because I go outside and notice how beautiful the sky is. I get to go ahead and be present in the moment. Whereas somebody who is very fearful about snakes is going to look at that stick and just be in a state of anxiety and maybe not even realize it. Maybe they don't even realize that the anxiousness that they're feeling is just because they saw a stick, and it's not even happening on a conscious level. It's all unconsciousness. They just feel this sense of anxiety. This is just an example about a stick. It could be also a location. It could also be you see somebody. It could be a lot of different things. And guess what? The longer you live, the more of these parts you have. A lot of these things could go ahead and be a lot of these, I guess, associations, like we keep saying, could go ahead and trigger people to have this low grade anxiety that's in their life.
An example is people who have a really bad breakup. Some people will go ahead and just not want to be in a relationship after that because it was just such a horrible experience. But again, it's not that all relationships are bad. It's just that that particular one was bad and that particular one was painful. And so the thing is, though, is that when we have these different parts and they start to hold these beliefs out of fear, out of shame, out of protection, right? It cannot distinguish between place and time and person or situation anymore, because it's only linked to that emotional part of the brain that can't recognize all those features of the part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, that can distinguish between person, place, time, and event. So with neuroplasticity, all that you really need to understand is that this is what gives you the ability to change your life. This is what gives you the ability to change the way that you think, to change the way that you feel, to go ahead and heal the symptoms that you're experiencing in your life.
Let's talk about something really interesting. One way we can go ahead and use these therapeutic techniques is to essentially stimulate something that's called flow state. I've experienced flow state on accident. The first time I experienced flow state was when I was skateboarding. And for the longest time in my life, I thought that was a fluke. What flow state is flow state is essentially when you're doing something that you've done. Okay, specifically for me, it was skateboarding. I practiced skateboarding on the grass because I was too afraid to go ahead and fall. So I would practice tricks, for example, doing an ollie, which is when you make the skateboard jump up. I practiced a kickflip, which is when you make the skateboard jump up and then flip around. And I practiced a bunch of different moves, but always on the grass, never actually moving. Why? I just didn't want to fall and I didn't want to hurt myself. I learned many, many times to go ahead and do it repetitively on the grass. And what ended up happening is we used to play this game called skate. Skate is skate, and it's like horse when you play basketball. And horse in basketball is when someone does a trick shot and you have to do that same trick shot. So in skate, someone's going to go ahead and do a trick, and then someone else has to go, and everyone has to continue doing the trick. And the person who doesn't do the trick gets the letter S. As soon as you spell the word skate, you're eliminated. And the person who is able to do all the tricks is the winner of the game. So you can imagine that now I'm playing with these people, that game, and the first trick is to go ahead and jump over a skateboard that's sitting on its side. And I've never done that before. And I'm thinking to myself, crap, I'm going to go ahead and fail. I've never done this before moving. So the first guy goes, he does it, and he's a much better skater than I was. And then it's my turn, and I do it. And I think to myself, holy crap, I can't believe I just did that. I felt like it happened for me. I honestly thought for the longest,
Effortless.
yeah, it was effortless. And for the longest time in my life, I literally thought that was an accident. But then he does the same thing, but this time he kickflips. And I'm thinking to myself, holy crap, that's a much harder move. I mean, one thing is to go ahead and make the skateboard jump up. The other thing is to make it jump up, flip, and land on it. Again, never done it before. Now I have to go ahead and do it because all this pressure is on me because it's me and him. And I go ahead and, to my surprise, I was able to do it. And again, it felt effortless. I don't remember actually thinking about it. It just happened. And like the same things happened over and over and over again for a bunch of different tricks. And I was able to go ahead and eventually get beaten because the guy, again, was a superior skater than I was. But the fact that it went even that long surprised me. And it was just one of these moments that it just followed me for the rest of my life. And I always thought you can get very lucky. And you hear that over and over again, like when I play pickleball or when I play any sport, a lot of people would go ahead and say, oh, that was a lucky shot. And the thing they don't realize is no, you were just briefly able to go ahead and get into a flow state.
And be so present.
Exactly. Absolutely. So why is this therapy helpful? Because you could go ahead and learn to take advantage of that. So the flow state has these characteristics. The characteristics is STIR. That's the acronym. The S stands for selflessness. The T stands for timelessness. The E stands for effortlessness. And then the R stands for richness. Selflessness just means that you lose the sense of these parts. Okay.
Yeah, you lose the ego, the need to win, the need to whatever.
Exactly. So you're just present. And again, what does IFS therapy do? It teaches you to go ahead and do that. So
yeah, because one of the characteristics of self, the 5 Ps, one of them is presence
and playfulness. Mm-hmm. The point is that to get into a flow state, you need to be able to lose that sense of that fake sense of self, as in your ego, as in all your malfunctioning parts. Essentially, you're just 100% there. The T, timelessness, again, when I'm playing pickleball or when I'm playing sports that I really enjoy playing or when I was skating, it just feels like I was there for minutes.
And hours have gone by.
Passed by, exactly. And then E, the effortlessness, it really did feel like my body was just doing whatever it is. But one important thing to understand is this. For it to be effortless, you have to have practice. One thing that I did was I practiced those moves on the grass. And it was only when I put myself in a situation where I had to perform is when I actually was able to go ahead and do it. And it felt effortless. Again, I thought it was an accident, but for it to be an accident over and over and over again, just means that that's not necessarily what's happening. And then the R is the richness. The richness, how did you describe it?
The richness of the present moment where you're just able to go ahead and take it all in and just feel great.
Exactly. So all those things are flow states. And a flow state, just to go ahead and be a little bit more clear on what it is, and my interpretation of it is being able to use your prefrontal cortex, or essentially being able to be in a true self state, and then using your parts and jumping from one part to another part again, you're flowing from one neuronal network, but you're always in your true self. So you're always using your prefrontal cortex, and you're using these neuronal networks that are functional. So for example, let's pretend I'm playing pickleball. Well, I'm using my pickleball part. Again, it's my true self, and I'm using my pickleball part. Now I have to go ahead and, once I serve it, I have to use my strategy part. That's a different part. Those aren't the same things. My strategy part might be in a different region or a different neuronal network, but I have to effortlessly switch from one part to another. Then I have to communicate to my partner. So then I have to be able to communicate. That's a different part. But the fact that I'm jumping and effortlessly going from one part to another, to another, to another.
And you're performing well.
Exactly. That shows you that I am in a flow state. Mm-hmm. And when you're in a flow state, that's when you perform the best.
I mean, you could think about it in terms of the NBA, in terms of the NFL. When you watch these amazing games or these amazing plays that are done, you can go ahead and be like, I can't believe how that person did that. Yeah. They're in a flow state.
Absolutely.
That's how they did it.
And when you go ahead, you said the NBA, and literally one of the first things that came up to my head is, I don't know if anybody has seen the TV show where they talk about the Bulls. Oh, crap, I don't remember the name of the TV show, though.
The Last Dance?
The Last Dance, yeah.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah, The Last Dance.
I don't know how I even know this.
Yeah, so The Last Dance literally talks about how Phil Jackson. They call him the Zen master. Why? Because he practices these Buddhist techniques to elevate people's game. And it's the exact same thing as IFS therapy. It's essentially, once you go ahead and you start to understand these things, you'll start to go ahead and see the same message repackaged in a different language. And you could see that the most successful people in history understood these concepts, whether it be Marcus Aurelius, whether it be Abraham Lincoln,
Jesus.
yeah, Jesus Christ. You could go ahead and see that every important figure that people could go ahead and say that this was not just an important figure, but was able to accomplish and change the world, understood these concepts. They understood it in a slightly different way, and they obviously understood it because of their upbringing. Maybe they could even say exactly what we're saying, but again, it was through their experience that they understood it. And that's the problem. The problem is that a lot of people aren't going to have those experiences. But with IFS therapy, it gives you step-by-step guides that you can go ahead and learn to essentially learn what they actually meant.
So something that I want to do right now while it's coming to my mind is give everybody an opportunity as they're listening to this to just become aware of a part of themselves. So you can do this with me now. I'll do it at the same time, where we're just going to take a second and make this super applicable, everything that we're talking about, and just kind of notice, how are you feeling in your body right now? Do you feel tension anywhere? What are kind of the thoughts that you're having flow through your head, right? Are you thinking, this is stupid. Oh, I need to go do something else right now. I'm busy. I'm whatever. Just kind of become aware of this. Do you feel energy in any area of your body? And then just take a second and just notice it. Notice it, feel it.
Absolutely. And this is the thing. You said negative things, but it could also be positive. It
Yeah.
could be, I'm loving what I'm hearing. It could also be, you know what?
Yeah, I feel connected to what I'm hearing.
Exactly. I know exactly what they're talking about, and it's giving me a lot of inspiration. You know, so it could be either or. It's just important to realize that the observer, which is your prefrontal cortex or your true self, is just witnessing these thoughts.
Yeah, you're present.
Exactly. When you go ahead and you learn to tap into that energy, you'll be able to go ahead and see real miracles start to happen.
Yes, it's life-changing. And I think that another marker is by slowing down right now that we did in that practice. Can you become curious as to what you're feeling? Can you become present as to what you're feeling? Can you become compassionate to give yourself the time to keep listening to this? Or can you give yourself the compassion to go ahead and connect to some of these feelings that you're feeling? And if you can't, that's okay. That just goes to show that you have a lot of these different parts that are activated in your life, and that's totally fine, as do we all. But this is just a way to start checking in with these different parts of yourself throughout the day. So just go ahead and take a few moments, become aware of the sensations you're feeling in your body, become curious as to what you're thinking, and just kind of take it from there and just see what comes up. Don't try to search out an answer, just see if answers come to you.
Yeah, and that's really important because one of the tricks that I learned in therapy is when you're trying to search for an answer, that's an analytical part. That's a part that's trying to do something. The entire goal of IFS therapy is to let the memories come to you. I always try to go ahead and imagine it like if the memories themselves are leaves going through a river. You don't want to swim out to go ahead and get those leaves. You want the leaves to come to you.
Yeah, because the leaves will fly away if you try to get to it.
Yeah. So we talked about how IFS therapy could help in a flow state and how you could use these flow states to help you out, for example, at work. That's one of the areas where I was able to luckily understand those things intuitively. I realized that, again, with practice, you're able to go ahead and get into flow states very easily. And I think that brought a lot of success to practicing dentistry. I remember perfectly being in dental school and just going a little bit extra and practicing a little bit extra and just having this single thought in my head. I'm going to go ahead and do this perfectly. I remember the reason I picked up this memory is just because I was cleaning my car one day and my uncle was helping me. And he taught me that when you go ahead and you try to do your best, you're trying to do your best just because it is your best, not because someone's watching, not because someone's going to notice, but just because. And it was washing a car. And for some reason that resonated with me. And I took that same principle and I applied it to everything else in my life. So when I do my best, it's only to do my best. It's not because I'm going to go ahead and get praise. It's not because I just want my best to be just my norm. So I remember in dental school, just practicing to go ahead and do perfection. And I'm sure a lot of people were doing that too. But when you go ahead and you start trying to reach perfection in the craft, in your craft, then essentially it'll become the norm. And that has been something that has been very helpful for me. And that's one way of thinking about it. And that, again, because it's practice and practice and practice, I was able to go ahead and more easily get into flow states. And I remember, for example, one time I was working on a patient, I was doing these implants, and it was 6 implants. We started at 5 o'clock at night, and it was 11 o'clock at night when we were finishing, because it wasn't just doing the implants. The guy had tons of bone that we had to go ahead and remove. And what ended up happening is I was in a flow state the entire time, but then as I was suturing, I got out of a flow state. And by getting out of the flow state, I remembered it, is just because I just didn't like the way the suture looked. I finished the left-hand side and I was doing the right-hand side, and it just bothered me. And because I got out of that flow state, that's exactly when I messed up. And I had to start all over again. And I remember getting super frustrated. And I literally remember telling myself, that frustration isn't going to help you. That frustration is taking you out of the moment. And I didn't understand those concepts at this time. Again, it's something that innately, I think we all understand this. It's more of, instead of having this personal experience that helped me understand these things, that's why internal family systems can help people understand it without necessarily getting these same experiences that I did that helped me understand it for this specific moment of my life. So I was able to go ahead and get back into the flow state. I finished it. And I always remember, and every single day that I work, I always know when I'm in a flow state. It really does feel effortless. It feels like I could honestly go ahead, and I'm not going to do it, but I could feel like I work on people with my eyes closed. And sometimes you kind of have to, because if you're doing a preparation or if you're doing something where you have no visibility, a patient's tongue might be in the way, you have to do it with your eyes closed. And it has to be perfect. It can't be a half-assed thing. I know I'm able to do it because I've done it before. Not on purpose, obviously. When I can see, obviously that's better, but I just want to clarify that. But I've done it before. And it's one of these things that if you don't have the practice, then obviously that's not going to work. So practice is important to go ahead and be able to go ahead and get into these flow states. Another reason why it's important to understand internal family system is relationships. Even just by understanding what internal family systems is in terms of calling it parts, you're able to have a much richer relationship. Why? Because you're able to go ahead and start to distance your feelings from yourself. This is any relationship. It works also if you're talking about significant other, because I know that if you have to have a difficult conversation, this is pretty much with anybody, one important thing that helped me to talk about things that I'm thinking about is saying something very simple, which is, a part of me feels this way. That might not necessarily be who I am, but a part of me does feel this way. And that lets separateness happen from who I truly am and that part. And
yeah, you're speaking on behalf of the part instead of from the part.
Exactly.
So you're making the part's needs, concerns, wants known, while also not letting that part run your life.
Absolutely. And that's really helpful, because if that's happening vice versa, as in someone else is telling me the exact same thing, listen, I have a part of me that feels in such and such a way, it makes it so that I can actually start to listen, because I'm being told that that is just a part. Mm-hmm. And now we can actually go ahead and investigate.
You're wanting to go ahead and have the part air its concerns and see if it really has to do with something in the present relationship or if it's something from the past.
Does it have any validity in the current situation? even if it's not valid in the present moment, it's still important to understand that it still feels that way.
Yeah, because it does impact the relationship. So if you can go ahead and become curious together, and that part can go ahead and share its concerns, and then you realize, oh, it has nothing to do with the present moment or my present relationship. This is totally a fear or a concern from the past. Then you can actually go ahead and bring it into the light. You can go ahead and address that part's concerns, and your relationship is just going to get better and healthier from that experience.
Absolutely. And then the last thing is obviously sports. We've seen with documentaries how people use principles of IFS therapy to help teams. You could go ahead and immediately start employing those same concepts by being present in the moment, by not necessarily wanting to win, but essentially just experience the moment and trying your absolute best. And these things sound like they're very simple things. You've probably heard it millions of times, like, oh, just try your best, just enjoy the game. Absolutely. But no one teaches you how to do that. And if you don't teach them how to actually do that, then they're just words, and words mean nothing.
Exactly. And these people have inner critics inside of them, an inner critic part that is going to go ahead and be whispering something in their ear that is, oh, well, that's not really having high perfectionism, right? A perfectionistic part that's like, that's still not good enough. And that's obviously stemming from somewhere. So for some people, when they hear try your best, they think my best is not good enough.
Exactly.
Well, we want to thank everybody for listening to episode 2 of the Get Real Therapy podcast. And we hope that it elevates you, inspires you, and just helps you reach that next level in your life.
Absolutely. We'll see you next time.